recording. Great. Okay, I think we're going to start. Good evening, everyone. Good morning to some people. This is quite a reunion from all around the world. We have Don Millar, the director of the movie he's in Vancouver right now. It's early morning. We have Fernando Botero Jr., who's all the way in Mexico. And then I'd also like to mention the two directors of Botero in China who work a lot with Fernando in bringing the art of Botero to China. Juan and Sandra Montana, who are actually in Colombia right now. And I also want to acknowledge Anton San Diego from Manila House, who helped us put this together. We have for tonight a discussion. I'm sure all of you have seen the movie about Botero, the documentary which Don directed. It was a 2-year undertaking, and I think you come away with a new appreciation of the art of Fernando Botero as an artist and also as a family man. That was what struck me about this movie. So to just refresh everyone's memories, I'm just going to show a quick trailer of the movie, and then I'm going to ask Fernando here to set up the trailer, just explain a little bit about what we're going to see, and then we're going to move on to Don, who will talk about the movie, and then back to Fernando, and we'll have a short Q&A after. And if you have any questions, just don't hesitate to type them in, and we'll take the time to answer them. Okay, so for now, I'm going to show the movie clip.
My mother has not opened the door to this storage in 40 years.
Oops. Uh-oh.
She says, let yourself go. Let yourself go.
Lo que yo quiero es pintar mejor que todo el mundo. Mi vida es pintar.
His friends were saying, "Are you goddamn crazy?"
Oops.
Artist, what are you talking about?
When he arrived in New York for the first time, he arrived literally with $200 in his pocket.
This walks into your studio, discovers your work, and then it enters into the Museum of Modern Art.
All of a sudden, everybody knew who he was.
You see, I like this fullness, this generosity, this sensuality that you communicate, because you know the reality is rather dry.
I think the been very critical of him. I think Botero's work is terrible. I think his work is Pillsbury Doughboy.
It's always an intellectual snobism. Everybody likes to work. It's a tragedy.
The moment he walks into his studio, somehow he seems to be younger because he's passionate about what he's doing.
To do something so dramatic at the same time will be so much love.
All big family people. I don't know if that's because we're Latin or because we all love each other so much.
Everybody has to die. Botero will never die. He will be there in the art history of the world. That's it.
Okay. So, Jeff, yeah, shall I go? Fernando, do you want to say a few words first before we go over to Don?
Okay, thank you, Bambina, for this invitation. Thank you, Anton, for putting this together, and thank all of our friends from the Philippines and from the Manila House for being on this webinar. I'm very delighted to be with all of you. The trailer you just saw is a very good summary of the film. It shows not only the origins of my father in a small town in Colombia in the 1930s, and also his projection to the international stage as one of the major figures in the world of art today. So I think, and the trailer also shows the personal side, the family side. So I think we'll have a great discussion today. And I'd like perhaps to start with Don. What do you think?
Thank
Don?
you. Thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Bambina. It's wonderful to be with you at this hour of the morning. I think this event in Manila and others, similar events we've had around the real world really speak to the global appeal of Maestro Botero, which is, I think, one of the things that we discovered doing the film is just this idea of universal appeal, which I first saw when Fernando graciously invited me to Beijing for the Maestro's opening there in 2015. And I was amazed by the appeal that Maestro Botero had there. And I was also just more intrigued by him. And just as I think Bambina referenced, just the personal characteristics that come through so strongly when you spend some time with the man. And so we managed to get the film going, as Bambina said again, and it took about 2 years. We shot for a total of 32 days across 10 cities. And it's just a fantastic experience that I thank Fernando for and thank Maestro Botero for his generosity. So I'm happy to answer any questions you folks may have.
Yeah. Good. So are you, that's it, Don? Sorry.
Yeah.
Fernando, do you want to say anything more before we go to the questions?
No, I think the most important use of our time is to interact with our gracious friends from Manila. So let's move forward to the questions.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? Okay, Anton is asking, in the New York warehouse, whatever happened to those paintings? Did they go to museums or were they privately sold?
I think that, go ahead, Fernando. I mean, I think that a lot of the material, as far as I was understanding, was going back to the Maestro because he honestly had not realized that a lot of that material was there. I think he's just been so prolific over time that people just weren't, that he wasn't even aware that a lot of those drawings and sketches were there. But some of the paintings, Fernando, I don't know what the disposition of them was.
Well, when my sister and my brother actually went with Don to open that warehouse, my father had not opened that in 40 years. And he was actually very surprised to find out what was there. After that, we did a very detailed inventory, and we realized that there were a lot of works that were experimental in nature that were used by my father simply to develop his mastery of technique, to understand better composition, color, line, form, all the elements that go into art. And so these works will be used in the future to a foundation in which my father's work can be studied by academics and curators in the future. And a couple of other works were placed in the market and sold. And several others are being used for exhibition in museums. So it's been actually like discovering a treasure that was buried for 40 years and then having this magnificent opportunity to see work that had been untouched for such a long time.
Can I just ask, behind you, Fernando, is obviously a painting by your father. How old was that? Was that one of the older ones or a fairly recent one? And
you have a very good eye, Bambina.
well, his style is very obvious, right? So.
Except for the woman in the corner.
Yeah, I saw the woman in the corner now. Yeah.
It's a very beautiful painting. Actually, I chose to sit here because this painting was exhibited in Manila about 2 years ago, and many of our friends from Manila had the opportunity to see it at an art fair in which we participated. Maybe it was
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
yeah, a year and a half ago. It's
Oh,
called
yeah,
the,
about a year. Yeah.
and it depicts a typical scene from a village in Colombia, the 1930s or 1940s. And I have it in my house here in Mexico, and I love the painting. And I wanted to share it with all our friends in Manila.
Nice. Okay, now I have a question from Bing de Guzman. Fernando, how do you think the art market will be affected by the pandemic? What is the new normal going to be like in the art world?
Very good question, Bing. So I would say that the art market will be in a certain way divided into two. The general market, which I think will be affected by coronavirus in terms of price and liquidity, maybe towards the negative side. And then what we would call the high end of the market, the blue chip artists, which have actually appreciated in value because of the pandemic. And the reason is clear with the stock market having so much volatility now and bond yields at zero, people are looking for alternatives to invest, and blue chip art has proven over time to be low volatility and very stable as an investment. So that segment of the market actually has been moving tremendously and appreciating value. So the effect of the coronavirus has been strange in that regard, having a very negative impact on most of the art world, but having a very positive impact on the very high end of the art market. Thank you.
I have a question from Sandra Gavard, and she's asking, she was quite fascinated by the shift Botero has been experiencing in the past years, especially with the Abu Ghraib series. Is he inspired by, in a similar way, by what's happening today? Well, we all know what's happening right now, right? The protests in the US.
Do you want to answer that, Don?
I'm not familiar necessarily with what the maestro is painting right now. I will say in terms of Abu Ghraib, he was certainly very passionate when we spoke to him in Monaco about that and just about using his art. And I think as one of the curators says in the film, you know, the ability to use these beautiful brushstrokes and that very generous and emotional style on one hand, but about a subject that was so tragic, right? And disturbing. So I don't honestly know what he's up to right now. I think that, as I say, it was interesting after all those years when we spoke with him in the studio in Monaco, just how passionate he was and really had a strong sense of pride about that work.
I would add, I would add further that, yes, I would add further that it's something that moves the heart of an artist. For example, if you look at Picasso was a very politically involved artist, and he was actually a member of the Communist Party, and he lived through the horrors of the First World War and the Second World War and the Korean War and the Vietnamese War, and you know, he lived through many turbulent times in the 20th century, and yet he chose the town of Guernica to express his political outrage. And in a similar way, my father has lived through many turbulent times as well, and he chose Abu Ghraib. I don't know whether he would choose George Floyd now, but I do know, because I've been speaking to him almost on a daily basis, that he is completely inflamed and absolutely traumatized by what's going on. And, you know, it's something that has impacted his heart in a way that is actually very surprising, given so many things that have been happening over the past years. But this case in particular, as with everyone in the world, has gripped his emotions and his heart in a very profound way.
Can I segue from that question then to another question about, to you, Fernando, what was your father like? I mean, as the master, as a father, how do you remember him most as a father? Were you always kind of aware that he was his artist on the path to greatness, or, you know, he was just a dad?
always aware that he was an artist, but not necessarily on the path to greatness. I would say that the contrary, because when I was a child, my father had no success as an artist. He had no money, and he had a very difficult financial situation, to say the least, and many an adolescent that he started to become famous and become wealthy. And so my memory of my adolescent years as a successful artist, but my childhood, which the memories are stronger, is as a struggling artist in New York, having a tough time and having a difficult, uh, time developing his career. As a person, always the memory of a very loving and a very affectionate father, always always nurturing the family, and very obsessive in his interest in his children developing an interest in culture. Always obsessionately talking about good books to read, great films to see, great concerts to attend, a preference for classical literature, a preference for classical music, a preference for the great directors of filming throughout history. So that's the image I have of him, a person who wanted us to be cultured people and a very loving person.
So a follow-up to that, what would you consider is the height of his artistic powers, similar to Picasso's Blue Period?
Well, I would say it's a very difficult question to answer, and it depends a lot on personal taste. My father has traditionally worked in series or themes, like the theme of the circus, the theme of the bullfight, the theme of Abu Ghraib, the theme of family life in Colombia. And my personal favorites is another theme, which is the theme of great versions of art. When he makes his own versions of Velázquez or of Goya or of other important artists. And there's one painting in particular, which is his version of the Menina, which is a very important painting in his atelier in Paris, which is my all-time favorite of all the Boteros that I've ever seen. So it depends a lot on personal taste, and that is mine. Thank you.
Okay, now, sorry, turning to Don, I have a question. Whose idea was it to produce the film? And how did the idea start? And how did you convince the maestro to do it?
So after this trip to Beijing, I came home and to Canada and just digested everything I'd seen. And I really felt that this was a story that had to be told. And it was very, very just interesting, I think, beyond just the art, as we've talked about, the personal characteristics of the man were really striking to me. And so I started to talk to Fernando about it and to his sister, Lena, who's got a tremendous background in media in Colombia and in Mexico. And I think if anyone's seen the film, they can see she's a very talented and knowledgeable presenter. And so I just started talking with them, and we started little by little. And the maestro is a private man. He is obviously getting on in years, and I think really appreciates, having the time to paint and to explore his craft. So, I think what was a priority for him is that we weren't going to be sort of in the way and in his face. At the end of the day, we ended up, shifting the schedule multiple times, but he was so generous with us in terms of that lunch, which I think was critical to setting up the story of his personal life. And I think, at one point we were getting facts across about his upbringing, but on the other hand, I think you could just sense the love that Fernando referenced a moment ago to his children and what a loving family it was. So both there, and then we spent a very significant amount of time with him in Monaco. But I think the approval was sort of incremental as we went along, and when we needed his participation, we worked with him, and that was principally through his daughter, Lena.
Where is he actually based now? Does he move from one studio to another, one atelier to another?
Fernando?
Or one home?
Yes, coronavirus has him trapped, as it has us all trapped in his studio, in his apartment in Monaco. Actually, he usually travels a lot between Monaco, where he spends the winter, Pietrasanta, where he spends the summer. Pietrasanta is a very beautiful village in Italy. And also he spends a lot of time in a house they have in Greece, given that Sophia, his wife, is Greek. So he travels a lot around the Mediterranean. He used to travel all over the world extensively, to New York, to Asia. But as Don said, he's getting on in years, and in the past 3 or 4 years, he's been limited to the Mediterranean, and in the past 2 or 3 months, limited to his apartment in Monaco. But hopefully, when things open up, I think he'll be traveling to Pietrasanta and Greece as he has done before.
And how did the whole China thing? I know you've spoken about it before at Manila House, but maybe if you could just recap how China figured so largely now in his late career. You brought Botero to China. What made you think that China would be ready, or did they have any knowledge of Botero then?
It's a great question. Well, actually, it started when I had lunch with my father in the year 2008 in Paris. We had lunch, and I asked him what was missing in his professional career. And, you know, because by that time, he had had every single accolade you can imagine. And he responded, very succinctly, said, the only thing that's missing, and I'll answer it in one word, is China. Because China is the only major country in the world where I had never had the opportunity to exhibit my work. And that's when that started. And I started working on that project as of 2008. And it was very frustrating and very difficult, 4 or 5 years in which nothing major happened. And then I had the opportunity to meet Juan Montana and Sandra Montana, who were based in China and who took on that dream of taking Botero to China, and they really made it happen. And I always acknowledge them for making that huge contribution to my father's career. And then we had a tremendous success in China. It was completely unexpected. We did not know how much the Chinese public would react to the work of Maestro Botero. But actually, at the end of the 3 exhibitions, we had 1.5 million visitors. And that is clearly a number which is amazing. I mean, it's amazing in the world of art to have 1.5 million people attend an exhibition. That's unheard of. That's Guinness Book of World Record material. That's something that has no precedent. And so it reflects the tremendous interest that his work produced in China. And it truly speaks to the universality of his language, because here we have a painter born in a small town in Colombia in the 1930s, whose subject matter essentially is his childhood memories in the 1930s and 1940s in Colombia. But he paints and he sculpts in a way that speaks a universal language and is appreciated in China, in the Philippines, in France, in Germany, in Russia, wherever. And that is, for me, the most important and most impressive aspect of his work, his universality.
Thanks. Now, Don, sorry, I have some questions about your work as a director and filmmaker. What would you consider the most challenging part of making this film?
Just the scheduling, actually. You know, I think that we wanted the children to play a prominent role, which they did. And so just getting everybody, all the pieces of the puzzle constantly put together. I will say that Fernando, I guess playing the expectations game, told me that we would get an hour with his father, and that at 59 minutes and 59 seconds, he would stand up and leave. And so that was one expectation. And we ended up, as I said earlier, with 6 hours with him in Monaco, and then more time, obviously, in Aix-en-Provence, and a little more time in Rome earlier, right? So, I mean, so that was an interesting surprise. I think also just the whole experience is just fascinating, and to see the degree to which, you know, we saw it in Rome and we saw it in Aix as well. He is so in the weeds on the details of how the material is presented, what lighting is used, all these things. He doesn't just show up, as I think the former mayor of Medellin said in discussing the donations to Colombia. He doesn't just show up and kind of have his photo op and then carry on his way. I mean, he was involved in the details of everything that we covered, right? And so it's very, just very interesting.
And then how about, you've shown this in festivals?
Yeah, so we've been in 27 or 28 festivals. We've had, unfortunately, 2 of them canceled, obviously, because of the situation. 2 of them in Europe canceled, and then multiple screenings in the United States were canceled because of this. And so I think it's good in terms of people enjoy the film, people who aren't particularly in the art world, much like Botero, people who aren't necessarily in the art world really enjoy the film because they're learning about him. We have 305 finished pieces of the work there. Plus, I mean, I think somebody referenced the New York storage facility at the beginning here. I mean, that was, to me, what a great surprise, right?
Yeah. And how has it been received by film critics and art critics?
Both positive and negative, mostly positive. I have to say, I think people enjoy the film. I think that there is a certain, you know, as we talk about in the film, there's a certain class of critics that are more into, you know, the classic contemporary art that aren't big fans. But I think in terms of film critics, the film's actually been very well received.
Are there, I mean, it seemed to be uniformly, in the movie you presented as uniformly very much aware of Botero's place in the art, you know, in art history, and a lot of it was very positive, right, about his style and the classical underpinnings of his work. But you had one especially kind of, you know, critical voice there.
Yeah.
Were you not able to show others, or was that the only one really in the art world who was kind of
we could have made a film about her views of Botero, and that would have filled the whole 90 minutes. She felt very strongly about it. Yeah, no, it's interesting because most art films, I mean, I've had one of the great opportunities with this film is attending. There are a limited number of festivals, and I attended one in Montreal and one in Italy that are exclusively devoted to art films, right? And so I've seen in the last year and a half, 40 or 50 of them, and there was no critics, right? We felt it was important not to necessarily get into the specific criticism of the work, but as an attempt to capture the life and the world that Botero exists in. These critics are part of it. We had seen this lady in our research in a tape actually that we found in the Maestro's closet in France, a 60 Minutes interview where the same woman, Rosalind Krauss, had been attacking his work. And so that she seemed like the most obvious choice. She's very well-regarded art critic and was very generous with her time and very kind to us. But obviously doesn't think much of the work. And so we felt it was important to have her in there, but at the same time, we weren't doing something that's like an art history.
Of course, but it was good because you brought a little balance as well to the film.
Yeah, and her personality is such that she could balance 5 other people in about 30 seconds. But she was just so emphatic about the whole thing, right?
Okay, well, thanks, Don. Can switch back to Fernando for a moment. You know, I was saying earlier that your family life was also depicted there in the movie. I have a question asking about how your relationship is with your siblings. You seem to be a very happy family. You all get along. Do you fight sometimes?
I think all siblings fight sometimes, but within the range of normalcy. But we have a very close relationship with Lina, my sister, and Juan Carlos, my brother. We live in different parts of the world. I basically live in Mexico, but travel extensively. And Lina basically lives in Europe and comes to Mexico a lot. And Juan Carlos lives in Miami, in the United States. So basically, the moment we see each other for a long time is the month of July in Pietrasanta. That's where we traditionally spend our summer vacations, and we spend the whole month together with my father. And it's a moment that is sacred for us and very important, not only being with the with my father, but with the whole extended family. When we sit at the table now, we're 22. 22 at the table. That's normal. And if any one of us has a friend that's passing through Pietrasanta, it's 26, it's 28, it's 30, like that. That is typical. So it's a beautiful location to be together in a large family, which is very similar to what exists in Manila and the Philippines. Many large families, and family life is being so central. As is the case in the Philippines, we love to dance, we love to sing, we love to celebrate music, and we love to have a good time. And that's what our family life is like in Pietrasanta. It's a tremendous privilege. Thank you.
And then further to that, there was something a little bit in the film about your little brother Pedrito, no? Who sadly passed away. And what was that like for? I mean, that was very moving. I think that whole period. I mean, that whole segment of the film where you spoke about him and how it affected your father. Does he still talk about it now? And how does he feel when I'm sure
Yes,
if
it's
remembers.
to lose a child is you know if any one of us thinks about our children, to even imagine losing a child is the most tremendous, the most horrible thing that could happen. And it happened to my father. Unfortunately, it happened to us losing a brother, and it was a very traumatic event in our life. Very traumatic, not only because of the loss of Pedrito, which was huge, also traumatic because for a long time it was not clear that my father would be able to recover his artistic abilities, given that he had tremendous injury on his right hand. So it was a really difficult moment. The tragedy of losing Pedrito, coupled with that uncertainty toward the future of my father not even being able to paint. And he expressed many times that it would be unthinkable, inconceivable for him to continue living without the ability to express his art. And unfortunately, his discipline in physiotherapy, uh, his commitment to recovering his ability to paint made the tremendous difference. And after several months, he was timidly able to start painting, and then actually produced what many consider the great masterpieces of his creation. For example, that painting depicted in the film of Pedrito on a horse, for me
Yeah.
is the masterpiece, because not only is his technique present, but also this tremendous emotion of giving a last tribute to his fallen son and painting himself in the corner of the painting. I think that that's tremendous. I cannot even imagine what went through his mind when he was doing that in his studio. What I do know is it took him many, many months to do the painting because of his limitations physically. But it's a great work of art and a testament to that very difficult period in his life.
And then from then, and there was something there that was a little Picasso-ish also, no? When Picasso would do an earlier period with a young boy and all that. And then your father ended up doing an exhibition next to Picasso. They put Picasso and Botero together in Paris. What was that like? What was that like for your father as well, to be side by side with Picasso in an exhibition?
It was a tremendous honor, and it had to do with something that happened in the year 1953. In the year 1953, my father was a young Colombian student in Europe, and he actually went to visit Picasso with the dream of being able to meet and talk to Picasso. And of course, the person at the door did not let him in. And that was a tremendous frustration for my father, to leave Europe without having met Picasso, which was one of the artists that he admired tremendously. And then 60 years later, the French Ministry of Culture decides to put together an exhibition in the south of France, and they choose Botero to be alongside Picasso. So in a way, this frustration of 1953 becomes a great encounter in 2017, 60 years later, when they meet side by side, and we see the work of Picasso right beside the work of Botero in themes like the circus by Picasso, the circus by Botero, the bullfight by Picasso, the bullfight by Botero, the nude by Picasso, the nude by Botero, and so on. And it was a tremendous exhibition, had incredible success, both critically and in terms of the public attendance. And definitely it was one of the highlights of my father's career.
Thanks. Don, can I direct a question to you about basically the film festivals and the film industry in general? From an economic perspective, the art business and the film industry are both very challenging. After participating in festivals, has the film been acquired and presented in some countries? And what would the future of the film be in terms of presentation and ability?
Well, we are in, I think, about 20 countries by now, and unfortunately none of them in Asia so far. And that number reflects the fact that we have an arrangement in France that also extends to a number of Northern African countries. The films had tremendous success in the United States and in Italy in particular. And the plan is, over a period of say the next 2 years, to have it on Netflix or to have it on a similar streaming platform. And we may try to accelerate that given the given the situation with movie theaters now, right? Which we don't really know what the future holds. We felt, given the grand monumental nature of the maestro's work, and given in particular the music that we had put together, we really wanted it to be seen in movie theaters before we moved it onto a streaming platform. And we've had a good run. It's just, there's just a real question as to the viability right now of movie theaters. And so we're figuring it out as we go. I will say that working with Fernando in particular, that, the opportunity to talk to groups like this and to present the film, what we consider these private screenings, which are now very private because they're people's homes, to be something that I found really enjoyable. And I think in terms of the mission that Fernando has, along with Juan Camilo and with Sandra, of promoting the maestro's legacy and his presence in the art world, I think that, we're playing a role with that. We were in Sotheby's in New York and very much enjoyed that. And we've had a number of private screenings in Europe as well. And so that's to answer your question, that's the combination. But now we're in this period of uncertainty where our strategy needs to change, right? Obviously, because we don't know exactly what's coming next.
And could you single out one particular experience that was the most memorable during the shoot? Because you were moving around.
The most memorable was what Fernando was just talking about, which was in Aix. Actually, there's two. One of them is actually personally with Fernando when we were talking about Pedrito Bambina, as you referenced a second ago, and I was just completely shocked. Fernando and I have been friends for a long time, and we talked to Lina about this car accident in Spain that took the little boy's life, and I was just completely shocked by the particulars of what had happened. So that was one, and then I think the other one was just how wonderful this lunch was to me in Aix. Lina, to her credit, she's got a tremendous eye and tremendous mind for the media world, right? And she just insisted really from day one that we needed to have this lunch with Botero and his children. This is when he's most relaxed. And it took us, a year to organize the schedule properly to have that happen. And I think it turned out to be in a perfect place. He was in a very relaxed kind of frame of mind. And I think we got great things out of that. And since you asked for one, I'll give you three. And the third one really is that storage room in New York. I didn't sleep the night before because I was so excited. I knew it was going to be great. And I knew we were going to find these things, but I didn't know what we were going to find. And to just, as Fernando referenced a moment ago, I mean, here you are with an artist, a young artist who is 30 or barely 30, doing these drawings, finding his style, finding his voice, and then putting the material away, and then his grown children 40 or 50 years later opening it. I mean, just for a filmmaker, that's just gold, right? And we were just completely shocked, and the location was beautiful. And the, you know, Juan Carlos and Lena were obviously very touched by what they found.
And everything, like when they were opening the in that storage unit in New York, everything, there was nothing scripted.
No, there was nothing scripted, and we didn't even, we didn't, I made a decision not to put a microphone on them because I thought that might inhibit the kind of natural flow of the session, of the opportunity. And so we just had a boom mic, and at the end, they were getting out some personal documents, some letters that Botero would have exchanged with family back in Colombia. And they, you know, our understanding overall was, you know, when you want us not to shoot something, just tell us, but if we're shooting it, we're free to use it. And so we got to the point where they were opening these letters, and Lena said, you know, okay, that's fine, you can leave now. So we kind of walked around the corner and then snuck back in. And then she's like, no, you know, we want you to go. And then we did it one more time, and she was like, out. And so we left. But that moment to me, you know, as a documentary filmmaker, I mean, it was just, it looked beautiful. You know, the art really jumped out. And as I say, you know, just a sense of discovery. They didn't know what they were going to find. We didn't know what they were going to find. And Botero didn't even know it was there to be found in the first place, right? So it was just really a special moment. Really special moment.
How many hours of footage did you end up shooting? I mean, you had to obviously trim it down to an hour.
We had 32 days, and about 25 of those days were with 2 cameras. And so I don't honestly know how many hours, but it's an extraordinary amount, and it's something that we can then do other things with the footage. Fernando has access to the footage, and so it's not only the film, but I think, you know, there's just a great legacy there. Right.
Sure. Yeah. Fernando, I wanted to ask again, I think a lot of people are interested in the family life as depicted and your relationship with your father and everything. At moments throughout the film, he seems so serious. Is he like outside of work or something? Is he funny? Does he like to laugh? And, you know, does he have those lighter moments?
It's a great question, because always when you have photographs of him, he's always very serious. He doesn't laugh at the photographs. I don't know why.
I don't know who told me that. Yeah,
it's very funny. But and then when you see him outside of a photo or a video, he's hilarious. He's very good-natured. Very he has a great sense of humor. He loves to laugh. And since he works alone, you know, as opposed to many artists nowadays that works with many assistants or many people that actually produce the artwork, in his case, he's the only one in his studio. He's alone. So, you know, he arrives at the studio at around 10 or 11 in the morning. He goes briefly to lunch alone, and then he leaves the studio at around 8 p.m. So when we see him for dinner at 8 p.m., he's like a castaway who has not been able to speak to anyone for years. So he's talking, you know, very much, you know, very active in his conversation, and very lively, and very interested in what's going on in the world and news and politics and everything. And as I said before, with a tremendous sense of humor. So it's very different, his persona, than what you see in a photograph.
Well, speaking of politics, I have a question here that the Maestro has met different people and celebrities all around the world. We saw the meeting with Clinton in the film. What does he say about it? And if he has to choose one of the most important face-to-face meetings or conversations with, would you know who it would be, who he would consider to be quite significant, having met in the world?
Well, he's actually met many of the great figures of the 20th century in terms of the art world, especially when he was living in New York. He met de Kooning, and he met Andy Warhol, and he met many of those important artists that were very, very much in the forefront in the 1960s in New York. And then in Europe, he had the opportunity to also meet many important artists such as Balthus, César, Bacon, many of the artists that were very active in Europe in the 1970s and 1980s, among others. And in terms of politics, he said he has had 2 very memorable meetings. One with Che Guevara. Imagine
Oh.
having dinner with Che Guevara in New York. Che Guevara was present in New York because he was addressing the General Assembly of the United Nations, and there was a dinner party, and my father had dinner with Che Guevara at a table of 6 people, and he said that was one of the most amazing moments of his life. And the other was the invitation.
He's just frozen, yeah.
You froze for a second. Oops. Fernando?
Fernando, you might want to just re-enter. I think that's what'll work.
So that's Mexican internet, right? It's not here.
I guess it is. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Should we try again, Fernando? Uh-oh. Let's see.
Fernando, maybe if you push stop video and then start video again, that generally works. There, he's coming back. There we go.
You have to unmute. Fernando, just unmute.
You've got to unmute yourself, Fernando.
Okay, I'm sorry.
There you go.
There you go, sorry.
Okay.
As you
were
were
saying
saying.
Che Guevara.
I don't know where I was cut off. I'm sorry.
The second historical figure.
Yeah.
The second that he was invited by President Clinton to the White House for dinner, and he was amazed that President Clinton knew his artwork extensively. He commented on many of the paintings in detail, many of the sculptures, so he was quite impressed. And also that Clinton was a huge fan of Gabriel Garcia Marquez and had read 100 Years of Solitude 3 different times during his life. So his interest in Garcia Marquez, that novel, and Botero had him become particularly interested in Colombia. So that was a memorable meeting as well. So from Che Guevara to Clinton, quite a contrast, but 2 fascinating figures.
I wanted to also have another question from Anton about your father having lived a long and prolific life. Has he shared with you his thoughts on COVID in comparison to his early life growing up at such a volatile time? I mean, I'm sure he's being careful in Monaco, right?
Mm.
And
Fernando?
oh, did you hear that?
I don't know.
Don't hear.
You're not muted. Hang on. Okay, maybe we'll move to you first, Don. I just wanted to ask you for the film. You're a documentary filmmaker by profession.
Yeah.
Right. And what do you specialize in, art, or are there other topics?
Yeah, I mean, we're working now with a fellow in Thailand on fashion, and this is really, we've done a lot of short films about art and artists, but this was my first opportunity to direct a feature length film, and I, very much enjoyed it. But we were learning as we went along. I think Fernando's back in action over there.
Yes, I'm back. Something's happening with the internet, but apparently I'm back. Sorry.
I was just saying to Don earlier that to everyone that I feel, at least it's Mexican internet is similar to Philippine internet. So we're very much at home. No, the question was about your father's feelings about COVID. Obviously, I think he must be
Locked down.
being very careful in Monte Carlo, and how does it, he's had a long life and he's gone through a lot of, he's lived through a lot of political upheavals in the world and all that. And so how does he feel about COVID-19?
Well, he's actually terrified because he's 88. His wife is 80 and she's recovering from cancer. So her immune system is affected. So so they're, you know, basically they are in their apartment in Monaco, and they have a driver who picks my father up, takes us to his studio, and then picks him back at the end of the day, and they see no one. So he said that if he gets coronavirus, then it's done. I mean, at 88, it's done. And actually, I had a very severe case of coronavirus, so he knew exactly what I went through, and so clearly he doesn't want to go through the same experience that I did, and that's why he's basically, you know, he says he won't see anyone else in his life until a vaccine.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear that you weren't well, but I'm pleased that you've recovered. So it must have been a terrible experience, since you
Yes,
said it was quite severe.
it was terrible. I was, you know, was on life or death situation for 7 days in intensive care. So, I mean, really serious, and thank God I recovered fully. But you know, I'm 63. My father's 88. You know, if he got it, you know, very difficult to survive it.
Yeah, much more difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
But does your father go back to Colombia at all?
Unfortunately, not, because basically where he would like to go is Medellin, which is at 2,300 meters above sea level. So because of health considerations, he no longer travels to Colombia, or actually anywhere where, you know, it's a long flight. So short flights in Europe, yes, but apart from that, no, he doesn't travel anymore, unfortunately.
When was the last time he was in Colombia?
The last time in Colombia was about 4 or 5 years ago. Yes, that was after the Botero in China exhibitions. He traveled to Beijing, he traveled to Shanghai, and after that he went to Colombia, and that was the last time he made such a long, you know, transatlantic journey.
But he must be widely recognized in Colombia. Were people like coming up to him, if you know, when he would be out and about? Yeah.
All the time, and you know, he has a studio in Colombia, and he works at around 6 or 7 p.m. He takes his car with his wife and goes to any of these small villages that are near where he lives, and he just has an aguardiente, which is a liquor, on the plaza of the town, and then he loves for people to come up to him, speak to him, ask for his autograph, all that. Take a picture, and he does that every day after work while he's in Colombia.
And that museum that he has, where he's donated all the work, that's in Colombia, right? That's in Bogota.
Yes, and that comes up particularly well in the movie, and especially when my father says that the thing that he's done in his life that has given him most satisfaction is to have donated these works to a museum in Bogota, which is the Botero Museum in Bogota, and a museum in Medellin, which is called the Museo de Antioquia. And he donated, you know, a very large number of his works to those two museums, plus his own personal collection, where he had Picasso, Miro, Renoir, Monet, Bacon, many of the great artists of the 20th century and the Impressionist period. He donated all those paintings to this museum in Bogota, and it's actually the most important art collection in Latin America, in Bogota.
But do you feel at all territorial about your father's work? I mean, like, you know, obviously you're his heirs as well, but do you have the sense that he belongs to the world, not really to you anymore, or do you have enough works of your own to, you know?
I definitely feel that he belongs to the world, and I was impressed one day when I went to visit a small village in Morocco, a very, very small village in Morocco. You know, no one would go there, not a tourist destination. And I went to a small cafe to have a coffee. And that cafe was decorated by posters of Maestro Botero. And I was just very much impressed. I said, this is what having global reach looks like. This is being known globally in a small village in Morocco.
But were you surprised? What did you feel how did you guys feel when he decided to buy all the, the Monets and Picassos and all that and donate them? Because he was buying them after he decided to have the museum as well, right? He was acquiring them to give.
Yes, he had a very large collection, and about 60% of the works that he donated, he had before he made the decision, and about 40 or 30% he purchased afterward. And actually, we were quite enthusiastic. My brother Juan Carlos helped my father, you know, uh, put together the whole collection and identify many of the works that were purchased. So yes, it was a family effort, and we all supported this initiative my father had, and I think that it was a very, very wise and very beautiful decision on his part to make this major contribution to his home country.
I think, do we have any more questions? I think it's been an hour. If anyone has any questions, I think we have time for one more. Otherwise, Don, would you like to say the final words?
Thank you. Yeah, just thank you. It's really meaningful to those of us who worked on the film to know that people appreciate it and that they're seeing it despite these conditions from COVID-19. So just thank you very much and really welcome the opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for making yourselves available this early morning in Vancouver and Mexico and Colombia. I think this is a great talk. It's always nice to get to know an artist in depth. I wish one day he'd be able to come to, the maestro himself would be able to make the journey to Manila, but maybe, as you said, Fernando, he doesn't really travel much, take long flights. But on behalf of Manila House, we'd like to thank you for joining us this evening, for sharing your time. And just a reminder to our attendees, next week we have a talk on pandemics. It's a historical perspective on pandemics in the past, so going back to more than a century ago in the Philippines with a historian, Manolo Quezon. Thank you. I have one more question. Can I just sneak one more question in? From someone is asking, did any of Fernando and your family, are any of you on the path to becoming artists? Did you inherit his talent? Your father's talent?
Well, I could say with 100% certainty that none of us has any talent for art. Unfortunately, I wish we did, but we don't. We have, fortunately, talents for other things, I guess, but not for art. And I would like to say in closing that it's been a great privilege for me to participate in this webinar. I love Manila. I've been to Manila many times. I have many friends close to my heart in Manila, people that I love tremendously and that I respect and admire. I know Manila House. I've been there several times. I love it. So what a great occasion to be with all of you. Thank you so much for this invitation. And thank you, Bambina, for all the work you put into making this happen. Thank you, Anton.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. It's becoming a yearly thing with Botero and Manila House. So this is the third year running. So hopefully we have to plan something next year.
Wonderful.
Okay,
wonderful.
thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll
Thank you so much.
Time. Thank you. Bye. Wow, thanks guys.